I'm not sure who on the channel is actually observing Sabbath or holy days, but I did want to make a correction. In the past, I was someone had joined us in the body, and they were in a different time zone, and they had insisted that they wanted to make sure that they were assembling with us during the Sabbath. So that appeared to be important to them. So I went in and changed all of the times and some of the dates for assembly, and then they couldn't be bothered to actually show up consistently. So I believe that in that process, some of the dates got changed on the document. So if you have emailed me and I've sent you that document, please email me again so that I can send you the corrected document. Passover is going to actually begin on the evening of the 13th. I think I said in another video that it would begin on the 12th. It actually begins on the 13th. And it would be good for everyone to double check my work, because I am human, to double check and look at what is the date of new moon and count it down from there. I've put the document together as a help to you, even including dates during which I'm not even going to be here. But that doesn't absolve everyone of personal accountability to make sure that you know how to count down these dates, that you are looking for that crescent, for that new moon, and that you're obeying in accordance with what God has commanded. Another thing that I want to tell you is that the command for Passover is that you observe Passover for 7 days. And on the first day, you are to assemble and observe it as a Sabbath. And on the last day, you're to observe it as a Sabbath. Now, if you are observing Sabbath, then you would understand that this is not following the same pattern. This is breaking up, changing the pattern that we would normally follow for a Sabbath. Normally, a Sabbath would be counted as 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. That's a 7-day Sabbath. In the month of Aviv or Nisan, both of those names are used interchangeably for the first month on God's calendar. That's the month we're in right now. You might say, well, it's winter. It's not spring. I'm used to observing these things in spring. That is because of the prostitutions of those calling themselves Jews. If you read Leviticus, you will see that there are season-specific holy days and there are date-specific holy days. They do not correlate, as with the Gregorian calendar. So the calendar that Reformed Judaism is using, that you find online, that is referred to as the Hebrew calendar, it is not a correct calendar. I've already shown you in Scripture that God prophesied he would remove their holy days and Sabbaths and new moons. We know from Ezekiel and Zechariah that in the very end, he actually restores these holy days. He restores his calendar in the end. So on a 360-day calendar, which is God's calendar, you're not going to end up on a date at the same time, seasonal time of year, every year. It's impossible. This is why people argue all the time about the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and see, it happens, at this time, and blah, 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 because they have it in their heads and in their hearts that dates have to correlate with seasons. But that's because they're not observing God's new moon. If they were, they'd be brought back into the correct understanding. So in a normal month, you would have new moon is always going to be the first day of the month. Always. That's what it means. Rosh Chodesh means head of the month. New moon, new month. Now, science changed the new moon to the dark moon, but the new moon in historical times has always been the crescent. When the new moon starts, that's day 1 of the month. And it is a rest day. And we know that from Amos 8:5, because God is rebuking the people for working on the new moon or for wanting to go back to work. The new moon is not a Sabbath in the sense of a 7-day Sabbath, but it is a rest day. So then it's followed by 6 days of work and then a 7th day of rest, and then 6 days of work and a 7th day of rest, and you have 4 consecutive weeks in a month. You don't have an endless set of consecutive weeks in year after year. You just don't. That's not what God established. He established everything in reference to what he calls the faithful witness in the sky, which is the moon. So generally, you would have new moon as the first day, and then your Sabbaths would follow the 8th, because you have 6 work days in between. So the first is a new moon, then you have your first 7-day Sabbath, the 8th, then the 15th, then the 22nd, then the 29th. Then you have the last day of the month, which is usually a work day, the 30th. And I say usually a work day because when there's a holy day, it can throw it off. And I think it's the Festival of Weeks that throws off that last day of the month. If I remember correctly, it might even be this month, but I'm going to show you right now. And then you start all over again. First day of the month, which is the new moon, faithful witness in the sky. It's always going to put you back on track. Now, in the month of Aviv, you have a different pattern that God has commanded. On the 15th, you are to observe a Sabbath, and then on the 21st, you're to observe another Sabbath. 6 days later instead of 7 days later, because you're including the 15th as one of the 7 days, right? So you have 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. That's 6 days later. Normally, those 6 days would be a work day, but that 6th day, on the 21st, you're commanded to observe another Sabbath and to assemble. So this is breaking up the pattern of 6 days of work and a 7th day of rest in this particular month. What that means is that for the remainder of the month, your Sabbaths are going to be a day earlier. So now, instead of observing your Sabbath on the 22nd becomes a work day. So now you have the 21st as a rest day, 22nd as a work day, 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, and now you have the 28th instead of the 29th as a rest day. And then you have 2 days of work at the end of the month, whereas normally you would have 1 day of work at the end of the month. I know it sounds confusing, but it really is not confusing. It's not hard to understand. You just have to set aside what you've learned in the world in order to be brought into the truth of what God has established. Now, this is going to happen again during the Festival of Weeks, during that month, which, by the way, the month of the Festival of Weeks does not have a name. Why doesn't it have a name? Because it isn't in a particular month. It is set in reference to seasons. But, and I'll explain this more as we get closer to it, and you can also look at the videos that I've posted on the offering of first fruits and the Festival of Weeks. There is one thing that we know, because in Leviticus 23, it says, for the offering of first fruits, when you enter the land I'm going to give you, and you reap its harvest, and we know when they entered the land he was going to give them. We know that he commanded them to observe the Passover, and they did. And that the day after the Sabbath, the day after the Passover, on the 22nd, they ate the produce from the land. They weren't allowed to do that until they had brought that offering. So we know that that was the offering of first fruits, the very day after the Passover ended. So if you are observing God's Sabbaths, I want to make sure that you know this, that Passover is going to begin on the 13th, the evening of the 13th, until the evening of the 14th of February. Remember that this is, on God's calendar, the evening of the 14th of Nisan until the evening of the 15th of Nisan. They are to observe that first day, which begins the Festival of Unleavened Bread and the Passover. They are the same. They are interchangeable. Now, I want to contrast the command during the month of Passover, during this month of Nisan or Aviv, with the command for the Festival of Tabernacles in the month of Ethanim. Anyone calling it Tishrei? I know you got that from Reformed Judaism. It is incorrect. That is not the name that is used in the Bible. Tishrei is a Babylonian name. God used Ethanim. It's the 7th month of the year. And on the 15th of the 7th month on God's calendar, begins the Festival of Tabernacles. On the first day, you hold a sacred assembly, and on the 8th day, you hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. So now we're back in line with the Sabbaths that God has already established. So first day and 8th day means that you have 6 days of work in between. That's in line with what God established with those 7-day Sabbaths. If you would like a copy of the schedule, I have a schedule all the way to, I think it's 2028. Then email me my new email address. So if you've emailed me previously, I've changed that email address because I was paying for that domain name. But you can find my new email address is on the homepage of this channel.